Welcome to the Introverted Misfit podcast with me, Caroline Smith, where we discuss topics related to the human experience of connection and communication with a slightly awkward introverted twist. What comes to mind when I ask you to think of an extrovert? You probably picture a lot of people gathered together, loudly talking, telling stories and jokes, nonstop laughing, feeding off of each other's energy, and just exhibiting very lively, charismatic behavior. You're also probably picturing someone who can walk into a room and immediately grab all of the attention and admiration, even from people who don't even know them and who they don't even know, and someone who can work the entire room without getting tired, without even having to think about what to say next. The kind of people who can entertain 10, 15 people all at once with ease and grace. Now, what comes to mind when I tell you to think of an introvert? Well, if you're thinking of the type of introverts who are shy, socially anxious, and maybe even a little bit socially awkward, you're probably picturing someone who stays away from people at all costs out of fear and nervousness, doesn't do well in social settings, no matter how big or small the social setting is, and is just overall very quiet. Someone who keeps their eyes glued to the ground whenever possible or to their phone so that they can avoid any potential conversation from happening. Someone who never goes to social gatherings and outings because they get too nervous about socializing. Well, that is certainly one portion of us introverts, but I want to use this podcast episode to paint you a new and improved version of introverted communication, one that is filled with power, meaningfulness, and confidence rather than shyness, withdrawal, and low self esteem. So today, I will be explaining exactly what it means to communicate with quiet confidence as an introvert. First, I want to tell you about the opposite of quiet confidence, which is something that I call quiet fear. Quiet fear is when your quiet demeanor and social withdrawal are actually rooted in fear instead of being rooted in your preference or personal choice as an introvert. So instead of being a confident introvert who can socialize with people when they are in the mood and when they choose to, your lack of self confidence and nervousness around socializing are what's really keeping you from meeting people and socializing. So here's what it looks like when you're communicating with quiet fear. You're too afraid to speak up even when you know you have something valuable to say, so you instead stay quiet. You don't say anything because you're worried about if people will think your ideas are stupid. You walk around so afraid of potentially being embarrassed or rejected that you can't even bring yourself to look people directly in the eye. You go to social events and gatherings and just sit in the corner all night long, clutching your drink for dear life because you don't know how to start a conversation with someone. In the face of basic conflicts and disagreements with friends, acquaintances, coworkers, etc., you keep your mouth shut because you're scared that people won't like you if you put your foot down, or maybe not put your foot down, but just slightly disagree with someone. All of those scenarios that I just described have nothing to do with being quiet. Those and other similar scenarios that I may have left off have to do with fear and a lack of self confidence. Walking throughout your life with a mindset of quiet fear as an introvert is keeping you stuck. It's keeping you from creating fulfilling relationships and social connections and then maintaining them long term, progressing in your career or your business if that's a goal of yours, and finding solid friends on whom you can rely. Instead of accomplishing those things, those really crucial things that all of us, extroverts and introverts, need in their lives in order to be mentally and emotionally healthy, what you get instead is all of those things that you don't want. Poor quality relationships because your low self confidence is mainly attracting people who don't value you or who take advantage of your shyness and lack of confidence. So-called friends who walk all over you and poke fun at you because they know you're too shy to confront them about their behavior. and your ideas and opinions constantly getting overlooked because you're too afraid to say those ideas with confidence. All of those things that keep you up at night, keep you in a state of constant stress about everyday situations that everyone else seems to have no problem handling. That is what a life of communicating with quiet fear looks like. So, what does it mean to communicate with quiet confidence as an introvert instead of quiet fear? Quiet confidence is when the choice to communicate and socialize is all within your power. Your choice to stay quiet or to have some alone time is not being controlled by your nervousness and your fear, but instead by your preference as an introvert. So it's not the source of your withdrawal, your social withdrawal is not a lack of self-confidence. It really is just your needs as an introvert for alone time to recharge. So here's what it looks like to walk throughout the world with quiet confidence as an introvert. You know that you do not have to force yourself to act like an extrovert just to make friends and to socialize. You don't feel threatened by or jealous of the lively extroverts in your life because you understand that there are people out there just like you. You trust that there are people out there who will like your introverted personality and who won't think it's boring. When the time comes for you to speak up and share your perspective or ideas in a group setting, you can do it confidently. You will be able to go throughout your day without that constant fear of rejection, embarrassment, and being judged by others. You'll be able to deal with conflicts and disagreements without taking things so personally. You'll be able to stand up for yourself without feeling bad about it. And when I say stand up for yourself, I don't mean that you have to do it um, all loudly and boldly if that's not in your personality. You can stand up for yourself in a way that feels natural to you, but yet in a way that is still um, respected. So, whether that's just calmly explaining your boundaries when they are crossed, or even just knowing when it's time for you to get up and walk away from situations that don't serve you. And instead of constantly avoiding social events because you're nervous about talking to people, even though you may want to go, you'll be able to avoid them only when you're really not feeling up to it. And when you are feeling up to it, you'll be able to go to those social events without fear, talk to people using your introverted communication strengths. So, the key difference to note here is that quiet confidence is when you have confidence in your introverted strengths. You know when to use them, when not to use them, and when it's time for you to recharge your social battery with some alone time. Versus quiet fear, which is when you are an introvert who avoids social interactions and events consistently out of fear or nervousness, and not necessarily because you don't want to go. So, with quiet confidence, you are in full control of your introverted power. And with quiet fear, it's the fear and the nervousness that's controlling you. So, how can you learn to communicate with quiet confidence as an introvert and leave behind your life of quiet fear? Well, there are really two main parts to that solution. The first is to connect with your introverted communication strengths and weaknesses. And the second is to build the confidence to use those communication strengths in the real world. So let's start with number one, connecting with your communication strengths and weaknesses as an introvert. Not every introvert is exactly the same, which means that we are all going to have different strengths and weaknesses and different qualities that make us more introverted than others. So even though I'm explaining what I've observed as being some of the most common traits and strengths of an introvert, it doesn't mean that you have to the T, relate to every single one. And by the way, this doesn't mean that extroverts are incapable of using these same qualities in their social life, because I've talked about this a lot before, but introverts and extroverts are really just two sides of the same coin. We may be different, but we really are more alike than we are different in our human qualities and our need for social connection. It's just a little bit different, and we might be motivated by different things, but that's another podcast episode. So in this segment, I'm going to talk about the introverted strengths of introspection, deep thought, listening, and one on one connection. The power of introspection. Introspection is the examination of one's own thoughts and feelings, or in other words, the act of being reflective. Your introspective nature gives you the ability to truly understand your own emotions and thoughts regarding a multitude of topics and situations. And because of that, you can be particularly compassionate and empathetic to what others are going through. Because you understand them on a personal level, you can connect with them on a much deeper level. The power of deep thought. Deep thought is the ability to think about things below the surface level. So when you are purely thinking about issues and problems on the surface level, you're only going to come up with very superficial and temporary solutions to those problems. But when you are able to think about things deeply, you can explore every aspect of a problem and get to the root cause because below the surface is where the real root answers are. The power of listening. There are a lot of people walking around right now who feel unheard and invalidated because they don't feel like they are being listened to. And more than that, they don't feel like they're being understood. Listening is what makes people feel valued and seen. Sometimes people don't even need a response from you or advice from you. They just want someone to listen and to show that they genuinely care about what they're going through. So I want you to remember the last time that you were in conversation with someone or multiple people who either intentionally or unintentionally made you feel invalidated. Maybe they laughed at your perspective on something. Maybe they brushed off your feelings and acted like you were overreacting when you don't think you were overreacting at all. Maybe they were scrolling on their phone the entire time that you were trying to talk to them, which indicates that they just really are uninterested in what you have to say, or any other similar scenario. Remember how you felt your heart just sink to the floor the moment you realized that you were essentially talking to a brick wall, and how you left that interaction probably feeling very small and unimportant. The power of listening, true listening, where you are really trying to understand what the other person is saying and where they're coming from. You make people, with that kind of listening, you make people feel like they matter. And that in itself is a very powerful communication tool. And finally, the power of one on one connection. And I say finally, but like I mentioned before, these four introverted strengths that I'm explaining, these are not the end all be all of introverts. There may be more, or maybe one of these four that I've mentioned is something that you don't think is necessarily a strength of introverts, but it's the core ones that I think many introverts possess. But nonetheless, one on one connection allows for more meaningful conversations to happen. It's not that group conversations don't have their place, but typically, the more people who are involved, the more the conversation can veer off onto different topics every few minutes without you really getting to delve into one topic really well. This is especially true if there are other more outspoken, extroverted people involved. Because in that case, you'll barely be able to get a word in before the topic changes, or before someone else chimes in with their thoughts and opinions, and then your more reserved and quiet nature just it gets overlooked. And I've certainly been there plenty of times, as I'm sure you have been too. But one-on-one connection is really an optimal situation for much deeper connections to happen. So those are what I think are the core strengths of an introvert: introspection, deep thought, listening, and one-on-one connections. And again, if you think I forgot one, or maybe you disagree with one of the ones that I mentioned here, make sure to put it in the comments so that we can open up the discussion some more. So that's the first part of connecting with your strengths, but the other part is understanding when your strengths are when they need to be used and when they don't need to be used. So basically, you need to know when it's time to lean into those communication strengths and when it's time to pull back on those and instead maybe use some of those weaknesses that you don't really prefer to use because everybody on earth, we all have to communicate with people who are different than us, who may not be the same as us. And so it's really important to be flexible. And also, I don't think weakness is necessarily a bad word because again, it's something that all of us have to learn to live with. It's a fact of life. So, for example, I talked about how deep thought and deep conversations are one really powerful tool that introverts possess. But deep conversations are not appropriate for every social setting. And sometimes it's not that they're not appropriate, but you might just not want to pour out your heart and soul and your deepest thoughts to the wrong person because you don't know if they can even be trusted. So things like small talk, light conversation, those are tools that you should really have in your back pocket and you should improve on if they're not as strong so that you can use them when the time comes for them. Um, and by the way, if you are a shy and awkward introvert who struggles with your small talk and your conversational skills, I have a completely free guide to small talk specifically for shy and awkward introverts that you can download by checking the link in the description, or you can just go directly to the introvertedmisfit.com/resources, and it should be on that page, along with all of my other free resources and downloadables for shy and awkward introverts. So that's one example. Or the one-on-one connection. You're not going to be able to solely rely on just one-on-one conversations 100% of the time. There are going to be times when you will have to socialize in a group setting. Um, which, by the way, if you are looking for a complete guide on how to socialize in group settings as an introvert, I actually have a blog post about that, which I will also link in the description of this episode. So check that out after you're done listening to this episode. So when you learn to improve on your communication weaknesses, I've found that you're going to be even more confident in yourself as an introvert because you're going to have the flexibility to move in and out of different social settings and fit in with different sorts of people that can really take you places. So essentially, what I'm saying is that if you solely rely on your communication strengths, you're only going to be able to talk to a select few um, people, which may be your goal. But when you can master or at least improve your weaknesses, you can talk to anybody. And that is a very powerful communication tool. So now let's move on to the second part of that solution, building the confidence to actually use those strengths in the real world. So, how do you learn to trust yourself and your strengths as an introvert when you've been so disconnected with them for years or even for decades in some cases? Well, lucky for you, the concept itself is very simple. It doesn't mean it's simple to execute, but it's simple to understand. You fix you fix it by taking action. So I want you to think back on the first time that you ever learned how to ride a bike without training wheels, if you can even remember that far back. You probably had knee pads on to begin with because you were worried about getting hurt. Your mom or dad was probably right there beside you, holding the handlebars to keep you steady. And they couldn't let go of you completely just yet because you did not trust yourself to keep the bike stable on your own without the training wheels. So they probably first walked beside you, and then they would walk a little faster, and then they would start jogging beside you so that you could start to get some momentum going. And they were probably encouraging you and telling you that you can do this. It's not as scary as you think it is. And then they start getting ready to let go of the handlebars as they're running with you down the sidewalk, and until they let go, and you're free to try it by yourself to learn how to trust your body to control that bike by yourself. And it might have taken a few times for you to get the hang of it, but eventually, when you did let go of that bike and then they let you ride by yourself, you were finally able to do it without falling over because you had learned to trust that you could do it without help. So, in other words, you built up the confidence in yourself to ride that bike without your parents' help. And eventually, you probably got more and more confident at the more and more you did it to the point where you could get rid of the knee pads. Or if you're anything like my cousin and I, when we were about 10 and 11 years old, we used to take our bikes to the top of the biggest, steepest hill in our neighborhood. It was huge. And we sat at the top, waited for all of the cars to pass so that we wouldn't be run in anybody's way and we wouldn't get hit by a car. And by that point, we had already learned to ride the bike and pedal with no hands. So we would just race down the hill, just fly down the hill with our arms out beside us, pretending like we were flying, basically. And we we didn't build our confidence in our bike riding skills to the point where we could do that sort of thing, like flying down a hill with no hands, like with no fear at all. That kind of confidence did not come by us just sitting on the sidelines, wishing, hoping, and praying that we would magically learn how to ride a bike. We had to actually get out there and do it over and over again until we eventually got it right. The same thing probably goes for when you first learned how to swim or, say, tread water in the deep end of the pool. So, at first, you were probably really nervous about going under the water and holding your breath, but the more you did it, the easier it got. But again, you could not just sit on the side of the pool and just keep wishing and hoping and praying that you would magically learn how to swim. At some point, you had to jump in and learn to trust that you could hold your breath underwater and make it back to the surface to breathe again. And I'm not discounting the importance of inner work that I think goes along with taking that action. Um, when I say inner work, I mean things like mindset shifts that have to happen in order for you to actually build up the courage to do it, and things like that. So, inner work is important, but what I'm saying is inner work alone without the action is going to get you absolutely nowhere. I actually remember hearing this old African proverb that says, when you pray, move your feet, which basically means don't just pray and wish for it to happen. Get out there and do it while you're praying and wishing and hoping for things to happen for you. You have to take action. So, what you can do is find opportunities to take action and use your communication strengths and then actually follow through on taking the action and not running away from it at the last minute like you've probably been doing a lot. If you're a regular listener of this podcast, you've probably heard me talk a lot about my experience with having social anxiety for many years because of me being autistic, which um, autism is something that comes with a whole set of social and communication difficulties that I've talked about ad nauseum in previous episodes. And back when I was still in the middle of trying to overcome my social anxiety, what I did was I found small risk social interactions that I could use to build confidence around my conversational skills and just um, improve my confidence and get over my discomfort in social settings. So I would go for walks around my neighborhood, and say friendly greetings to people who I saw just walking by instead of taking out my phone, staring at it, and pretending like I'm looking at something very important when I'm clearly not. Leave a comment if you've ever done that before, because I've definitely done that. Um, or when I would go to the grocery store, I would ask one of the employees there where I could find an item. So, like the peanut butter or something like that. Even if I already knew where the item was, I would just use it as an opportunity to practice eye contact, speaking at a legible volume where people could hear me, um, smiling, and then ending the interaction without being awkward, and everything else that goes with socializing. Or back when I still went into the office to work as a web developer before I started working remotely, I would say, or I would start saying good morning to people. So to my coworkers and to my boss when I first walked in, which is something that I never used to do when I still had social anxiety. So previously, I would drive up to the place and then park my car. And I would have to wait there for like a few minutes to just watch everybody else go into the office first because I was trying to avoid meeting them at the door so that I wouldn't have to like talk to them. And then when I did eventually go get into the building, I would just keep my eyes glued to the floor and go straight to my desk and sit down so that I didn't have to talk to anybody. That's the kind of avoidance I was doing uh, instead of facing my fears of social interactions. And then if I were to get pulled into team meetings at work, I would make it a point to say at least one statement or just ask a question in the meeting so that I could get more comfortable talking and interacting with people in these team settings. And it didn't have to be anything profound. I just had to commit to saying one thing in the meeting. So even if you don't have social anxiety, maybe you're just a little bit shy and awkward, you don't have to use these exact scenarios and techniques that I went over. You really need to come up with your own opportunities that will get you out of your comfort zone that's relevant to your situation. I actually remember talking with a previous client of mine. She was a client in my 60-minute social confidence booster, which is a service that I offer um, on my website. You can go to theintrovertedmisfit.com/sessions to book one of those. But in this 60-minute session with this client, I was telling her about these techniques that I had used, these low risk social situations that I used to build my social confidence. And she responded to those by saying, well, I feel like those wouldn't really work for me because I don't really have social anxiety to that degree. Like I'm not afraid to talk to people. I'm just a little bit shy and I lack a little bit of confidence in in my social skills because she happened to be autistic just like I am. And so she was asking me if she thought that I needed to use my exact blueprint that I was giving her, or if she should come up with some that are more relevant to her. And I said, absolutely, you should come up with techniques and situations that are more relevant to your situation. So in her particular case, she was struggling with talking to people and engaging with people who she felt were more knowledgeable on a certain topic than she was. She had fear around talking to people who were smarter than her, basically, in layman's terms. So she found herself only talking to people who she felt like were, in her words, on the same level as her, and just not even trying to talk to people who she felt like she could learn a lot from because they were more knowledgeable. She didn't want to she didn't like the discomfort of talking to people about a topic that she didn't know about. So the techniques that she came up with for herself were to find situations that she could talk to people who knew more about some topic. It could be any topic, and she had to talk to them, and she had to do that at least twice a month. So that's um, one example of a way that you can kind of modify my scenarios or come up with your own that are more relevant to your unique situation. But anyway, back to what I was originally saying. During my social confidence journey, were there moments where I said some really awkward things and some really cringy things that made me just want to hide in my bedroom and never want to talk to anyone again? Yes. Absolutely. Those happened all the time. And to be honest, they happen less now, but they still happen sometimes. I've just learned to deal with them a lot better. But I don't want you to be scared off by those moments because those are to be expected when you're learning something new. So just like when you were learning how to ride your bike as a child, you probably got a few scrapes and bumps during the learning process that hurt a little bit, but you just had to put a band-aid on and keep going until you could build up your confidence in your abilities to ride the bicycle. If you had stopped every time you fell off or lost your balance, you never would have actually learned to ride the bike without training wheels. And that just goes to show that confidence comes with action. So you have to find opportunities that will build your confidence in your introverted personality bit by bit so that you can prove to yourself that you do have value and that your introverted personality is a strength within itself rather than being a hindrance to you. So, with this newfound meaning of quiet confidence that we've just gone over, I want to paint for you that new and improved image of introverted communication that I was referencing in the beginning of this episode. Picture yourself being fully connected with your strengths as an introvert and also fully aware of your weaknesses, whatever those may be for you. So you know what you excel at, you know what needs improvement, and you know how to keep them both in check in different social settings. You can adapt well to different social settings when you need to. So instead of avoiding every single holiday party or social gathering or outing that you actually want to go to, you have enough confidence in yourself that you can attend the events, find people with whom you can connect and have meaningful conversations and have a good time. And then after the event is over, you can recharge with some much needed alone time. Your friendships and your acquaintances don't consistently fizzle out because you now have confidence that the people who are a good match for you will appreciate your personality and will actually want to hang out with you. So you're no longer sabotaging your own relationships by not reaching out to people, not following through on those initial connections, and just not maintaining long term relationships. And when you're in the workplace, you become someone who people trust and consult instead of someone who constantly gets overlooked and undervalued. And you're no longer afraid to speak up with confidence in those team meetings. Doesn't that sound like the kind of life you want to live as an introvert? A life of quiet confidence? So I know that you're probably thinking right now, well, all of this sounds really good in theory and on paper, but in reality, it's so much harder to do, especially if you've been struggling with your social confidence for many years, like I once did. And you're right, it is hard work. But the good news is, you don't have to go the journey all alone if you don't want to. If you are a shy and socially awkward introvert, or maybe you happen to be autistic like I am, who is ready to leave behind a life of quiet fear and start embracing a life of quiet confidence, I have the one-on-one coaching program that was specifically made for you. And I bet you'll never guess what it's called. It's called Communicate with Quiet Confidence. This is my signature 12-week program where you and I will work together one on one for 12 weeks to address your specific needs so that you can go from being an introvert with low self confidence to being a socially confident introvert. And the best part is that nowhere in this program will you learn to act like an extrovert. You don't have to act like an extrovert to be socially confident. You will become more confident in your introverted strengths and abilities so that this idea of having to fake like you are some lively, charismatic extrovert when you're just not, it doesn't have to keep you from getting out there and making friends and being social in a way that feels natural for you. So if that program sounds like something that you're interested in and that you think could help you on your social confidence journey, definitely check out the link in the description of this episode. The link is going to be to the information page for that specific program. You can read all of the information about it. You can find out exactly what we'll be doing in that 12-week period, what you'll get out of the program. And then once you do get onto that information page, there's going to be a button for you to click there where you can book your free discovery call with me from there using my Calendly link. Um, or you can just go directly to the introvertedmisfit.com/coaching. That will take you to that exact same info page where you can read all of the info about my program, Communicate with Quiet Confidence. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, I'm looking forward to speaking to you on that free call. And that is it for today's episode. As always, if you enjoyed this talk, please don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button, leave a review and or a comment whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Spotify podcast, Apple podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts from, and share this podcast episode with a friend. Thanks for listening and have a great day.